Welcome to the Wealth Stream Podcast. The team at Hightower Great Lakes share their insights and passions for empowering their clients to live their best life. In this energetic podcast, we will take you on a journey to help you navigate your financial future, overcome life's challenges to reach your financial goals, and find the financial clarity you've been searching for. Let's explore the downstream impact of your wealth and what it means to you, your family, and your community to live greater.
Hello and welcome to the Wealth Stream with Tim Scannell from Hightower Great Lakes. Tim, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's January, beginning of 2022, and it's a new year. So there's always hope, right?
Yes. It's got to be better than last year.
Exactly.
Right. Now we're going to start off with a positive note. You're covering a lot today. You've got 10 questions that every business owner should think about, right?
That's right. So when we work with business owners, in particular, when we're providing wealth management and we talk about how to transfer assets and protect their assets and charitable giving, the topic today is really on what we would call like wealth enhancement, how to make sure that as you exit the business, and this can take a long time to plan for, that you're exiting into financial independence with the greatest opportunity possible to succeed, meaning if we can help enhance the amount, the net after-tax money that you get, the value that you sell for, you're going to be more financially secure for you, for your family, and for future generations. So that's really what I thought I'd talk about today. And there's really, I think, 10 things that, there's more than 10, but the podcast would go on forever if I expanded beyond 10. But these are 10 important things that business owners should be thinking about, I think.
Okay, so let's start with number one.
Number one, okay. So the number one thing that people should be thinking about as a business owner is, how do you see your involvement in the business changing or evolving in the future? And, I say this from experience talking to, many business owners, working with them on transitions. Oftentimes I call a lot of my entrepreneur business owners accidental entrepreneurs because, maybe you were a great electrician, you were working for a firm, you just didn't like the way the company was run, or for any number of reasons, you created your own electrical contracting company, and then you grew because you're good and you got referrals, and all of a sudden you're doing everything. And so when you're considering exiting, one of the things you need to really think about is, what's my role going to be when I exit? Should I stay? Should I go? When, et cetera. And like we had done episode, I think 78, where we talked about valuing your business is certainly about the numbers, but it also, what is also very important is really what your goals as an owner is. And so how you see your involvement, are you willing and able to stay for a while? Are you willing and able to mentor people for a while? That's going to be a really big thing to consider. And so you really need to think hard about that, rather, well before you're planning on selling.
Mm-hmm. All right. That makes sense.
So number two, what is the next great adventure you want to have once you leave your business? And this sounds maybe like it's not as critical, but I actually would maybe even move this up to number one, because I find that a lot of business owners I work with, their social circle, their identity is the business, is their team, is their clients. And unless you have a really clear idea of, or at least pointing in the right direction of what you want to do once you exit, it can go really bad. In other words, you can be financially prepared and financially able to retire, to exit. You have more than enough money than you need. But if you don't know what you're going to do, I have had people just watch too much TV or think they can golf all the time, or you really need to think hard about, where do I want to be? What do I want to do once I exit? And one of the things I talk to people about is it's really not critical that you have like this set defined plan, because I've seen that 100% of the time plans change post exit. You think what it's going to be like. You think how you're going to respond. You have new people in charge of your business. It's your baby. You've grown it. Now you need to find things to do. Your social circle is changing a little. But what I recommend people do is really point in a direction that, I think this is what I would like to do, but at least have that direction, and then be ready to adapt once you do exit. But you really need to think about it. Otherwise, it's highly likely you're going to be very disappointed and have seller's remorse when you leave.
Yeah. And here's the other thing is that, just speaking very honestly, I think that the whole COVID thing over the last couple of years has really opened some eyes to when people were working remotely and maybe both spouses were working remotely. When you're around your spouse all the time, it's a big change. And
It is, yes.
I say that, kind of tongue in cheek, but here's the thing is my wife and I have had jobs where we worked together basically 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. There is an adjustment period when you're together that much. And when you're talking about, what plans you have and what's your next great adventure, that is a discussion you have as a couple, right? I
mean, for sure.
Because like you said, you can only play so much golf, you can only watch so much TV, and the honey-do list only goes so long until it's just tedious and tiresome. So there's got to be an adventure that you launch into, and your spouse has to be a part of that in some way, shape, or form, because otherwise it's just going to be difficult. You just don't want that.
Yeah, and I have a client who he was a CEO of a nonprofit in the mental health care world, and also he's an artist. And so when he was leaving, he had this direction he was pointing at, because I'm going to really focus on my art. And it's 2 years later, it's dramatically changed, but he's now opening up a gallery.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so it's just pretty neat to watch that happen. He didn't know what it would look like when he focused on his art. But and it certainly changed directions from what he originally thought. But he knew where he was going, I guess, is the point, and that art would be his focus. And it's just fun to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, what is the third question?
So number 3 is, think about the obstacles that could derail, your business or personal goals in the coming years. And I always say to sometimes to my wife's Nancy's chagrin or my kids, I'm like, unfortunately, to some extent, I get paid to think of really bad things that could happen, And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of really bad things that can happen. And so I'm not saying be negative. I'm not at all. But what I'm just recommend people think about is, think about your health, think about your family. What are the things that could derail? So if you have a family business where you have kids in the business, maybe kids not in the business, that whole process of figuring out how you're going to exit, that could be derailed by family, personal, interpersonal relationships with family. In episode, I think 80, we talked about valuing with the Switzerland discount or the hub and spoke. How will the business be impacted, or what obstacles will be in the way if you, as the business owner, are doing everything, or if your company is just completely reliant on maybe one of your key people or one of your key vendors. So, make a list and really think about what are the obstacles that could derail my plans, so that you can at least address them and be ready for them if they actually do happen.
Absolutely. And I would encourage anybody to go back and listen to that, because that was a great episode. A lot of really, really good points.
Yeah. So number 4 is, what role does your business need to play in helping you achieve your financial freedom? So what most business owners I work with, they have an idea of what kind of after-tax cash flow they need, but at the same time, oftentimes they're using the business, or not using the business, but the business becomes a mix of business and personal cash flow, right? So maybe you're going on a trip, maybe you're doing things like that, and the psychological power or knowing that you can always tap into the business as your safety net is just a very common theme that I see among business owners, and that changes obviously when you sell it, or when you exit. So, you just have to figure out, what role does the business play now? How can I maybe clean that up and separate the business from my personal, in anticipation of exiting, and then really focus on what is that after-tax cash flow I need, so that when I sell the business, I really won't have to rely on, or think that I need to rely or go back somehow and have remorse that I'm not able to access, some of that cash or that safety net. So it's psychological, but it's a really important thing that they think about, because it really dictates how they're able to achieve financial freedom.
Hey, Tim, one thing that I know that I've spoken to other advisors and other people in my circles, and I know that switching from the mentality of being an earner to a spender, right? When you move from, working to not working is really difficult for a lot of people, because they've spent so many years earning, and now they're spending the money that's in those accounts, and it can be kind of scary. I would assume that actually gets magnified as business owners.
It really does. And, I always joke with clients, but it's true. I should have taken more psychology and less accounting in college.
Yeah.
Because I will tell you from experience that 100% of the time, it's a problem, especially for some of my clients, I've seen it take a year. It takes 2 years to really get comfortable with. I've always been adding, investing, saving, accumulating, and now I'm withdrawing. And there's just a real psychological change when that happens, and it takes a while for them to get used to it. I mean, the first year or two post-exit or post-retirement, into retirement, is really psychologically challenging for many people, not everyone. Some people just jumped into that one, love it, But I've seen just a lot of people, especially business owners, it becomes a real challenge for them to get acclimated to that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So number 5. So what is your plan for your ownership interest for the business? So in other words, we've talked about this on many other podcasts. Do you have family in the business? Do you have key employees who are interested and able to take it over? If they are, do they have the capital, or how is that going to be worked out? Or, do you need to look outside the business for like a competitor or a peer to make the acquisition, or maybe a family office or, private equity, things like that? So you really need to think, though, of, what is your plan for business? So, for example, I was talking yesterday to a client. They're in manufacturing, and they have 2 kids who are both in the business. And it's a challenge, like everything, to figure out, what role each one plays, each of the children plays, who wants to buy and who can buy, shares of stock long term. The thing is that founders, I find, or the parents, I find, very rarely have actually are comfortable talking about it, because they're really tough issues, right? I want to treat my kids fairly. I love all my kids, but they're different, right? Some are better at different things. And the amount of procrastination that I see, just because people haven't talked about it, that is really what creates the problems in general. And that's why I recommend, that people really think about what they want to do with their ownership interests, and then more importantly, proactively start talking about it, with the people who they think are going to, want it.
Yeah, and Tim, you've spoken about communication on this podcast many, many times, and I know that you have resources that can help folks do that and have that conversation. So at the end, I'm going to be asking you to give your contact information out, but I want the listener to understand that Tim has spoken about this many, many times. So you can find a lot of podcasts on this, but specifically, if you have questions, you need to be reaching out.
Yeah, and like one example, I have a client where they don't have family who wants to be in the business. There's not really any outside competitors or family offices or things like that who would be interested in. So, but they, in their mind, they always had the idea that their key people would. So when I said, "Well, have you talked to them?" And then they talked to them, and the key people were like, "Not a chance." I just no interest in that. So. Talking about it, I always visualize the iceberg. You see a very small part of the iceberg above the water. It's below the water that people generally don't want to talk about, but that's really the most important.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Understand what you want to do is number 5.
All right, number 6.
Number 6 would be, which method or methods, are you going to use to assess the value, and, how confident are you in the process? So what I find is most business owners, and surveys support this, don't really know what their business is worth. Many of business owners have CPAs, attorneys, great professionals, but oftentimes they don't, either they're not willing to, or they just aren't aware that they can, pay for a valuation. So again, this week I met with a client in manufacturing, and they were talking about how do we set up a business continuity plan in the event of like the kids pass away, in the event the parents pass away, what happens to the business, what happens to the shares. And I said, well, one of the starting points is really you got to know what the business is worth. Mm-hmm. So we have a process we use with a system called Biz Equity. And with that system, we're able to give a pretty good range for what the business is worth. And there's no cost, to getting that. Or at some point, I always recommend that the client really get a full valuation where they may pay, a CPA who is also like a CVA, Certified Valuation Analyst. I think that's what the A stands for. Mm-hmm. But they could come in and really for maybe $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, which is a lot, but they're going to give a full valuation, get a more accurate price, and more importantly, identify what those value drivers are. What are the things they could focus on in order to make the business even worth more when they do go to sell? So it's critical that business owners think about, how am I going to really understand what the value is? How am I going to get an independent perspective of that? Because business owners I talk to, and like I said, surveys support, most don't really know what it's worth, and they generally have a opinion that's different from what reality is, I would say. Let's just say that nicely.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's like you said, it's not cheap necessarily, but it's an incredible investment.
Exactly. And I think the value is, I really believe that people should get a certified valuation, but oftentimes people don't appreciate or don't understand what the value would be. So at the very least, work with someone who can give you like a business value, biz equity type good range.
Yeah. All right. I think we're on number 7.
So number 7 is basically given, what your plans are, who the buyers might be, whether they're key employees, family, outside, who are going to be the best leaders. So, like in our firm, we have four partners, including myself. We're looking long term to expand the partnership roles and encourage, younger next generation to take over. And the struggle, or not the struggle, but one of the key things we think about, and I talk to business owners about, is, not everyone has the same skill set. There's some people who are fit really well in different chairs, different operations, financial part, business development, customer service, but not all of them are going to be natural leaders who want to lead and who want to take on that role. So again, getting back to communication and just thinking about who's going to be the best leaders for the business when you exit. Because I have seen many instances, and you can read about many instances where you maybe have the right people, but the wrong people are in the leadership roles, and then the culture is just not good and it doesn't work out.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
In a case like that, there's a lot of different consulting firms, a lot of different systems and processes that you can use. We certainly have a list of options that we recommend to business owners, but you really need to bring in somebody independent to kind of help sift that out. And there's different systems to do that.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So number 8, what do you think business owners should ask, what do you think will happen with your customers, vendors, employees, et cetera, if something happens to you? And this gets back to that business continuity. So business continuity, if you're a big corporation, you've got probably a bench of people like Coca-Cola or some of these larger companies who are ready to step up, and they're going through training processes. But in smaller companies, family business companies in particular, you typically don't have that bench training and coaching process. And so the question always becomes, well, if something happens to the key people, if something happens to you as the business owner, the founder, do you have a plan in place? I mentioned earlier I was working with a company this week, and that's a real big issue. There's, like I said, 2 kids in the business, the parents, founders of the business. And if something happens to any of those 3 people, there's no plan in place for, where do the shares go? Who owns this? Who owns that? What's the succession plan, et cetera. So it's really, we have a business continuity ebook that has a checklist that really kind of helps go through the questions they need to look at. But it's something you really have to think about because it happens more often than you would think. And this part of it also goes back to what I've talked a lot about in podcasts, which is you really need to get the team involved, the client's team. So, for example, in the case I've talked about, what we're doing is we're scheduling a meeting where the attorney, the CPA, the insurance agent, myself, the founders, the kids, we're all going to be in the meeting, some on Zoom, some in person, really just to talk about, the issues and kind of hash through it. And it'll take a while. It'll take several meetings. But the fact that we're having this first one, I think, is great because you have to start it at some point.
Yeah, and I don't want to say it's a terrible example because I think it's actually a really good example, but do you remember the movie Tommy Boy?
Yeah, I love that movie.
I mean, here's the thing: it's a perfect example. You've got a father who is super charismatic, brilliant, knows how to run the business, and his son who's a complete idiot. And I'm not saying that that's true for every business owner, but if you have somebody who's in that lead position who is the face of the company, right? The movie gives a perfect example because father passed away suddenly, and then it was just a mad scramble to see if the business would even survive.
Right.
And it's taken with a lot of humor, but that's the fact for many, many business owners out there, whether it's key employees or whether it's, the owner or whether it's the children who are now the driving force. If something were to happen, you just don't know, so to be prepared again, I've heard you say that many, many times. I hope people pay attention and listen and at least watch that movie and then really see what could possibly happen, which is a bad thing.
Yeah, and at least it's a humorous version of a story that has a good ending. Oop, I just gave it away. But anyway.
There you go.
Yeah, no, I think it's actually, I had not thought of that as a movie that illustrates a lot of the concepts and strategies we talk about, but actually it really is a good example.
Yeah. All right, number 9.
Nice job, Eric.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah. So number 9. So this actually is a question that I like to ask business owners because I like to sift out what people have been, what you thought about in the past, what you like or dislike about some of the advice you've gotten in the past, because that tells me kind of what your goals are, what your hesitations are, and maybe where we should try to direct some of the planning going forward. So the question is, what suggestions, what planning suggestions, ideas, strategies have your other business advisors given you in the past? And so, for example, like oftentimes the CPA has talked about maybe tax strategies. When you sell the company, do you sell the stock in the company or do you sell the assets of the company? And taxation is miles different, in terms of how the buyer and the seller, are assessed taxes. Then the banker, I've run across a lot of times where the banker might come in and talk about an ESOP, as maybe a strategy, an employee stock ownership plan that they can finance and fund. And the attorneys are very good, I think, in general at helping with the legal documentation of the estate plan, business continuity plan. But oftentimes they do that, and then there's no real collaboration beyond that. I can't tell you how many times I meet a client who has a trust, but nothing's in it because it just hasn't been funded. So the point is that when I get a feel for what suggestions they've been given, what they liked and disliked, the next step is always, again, I'll go back to my standby, which is we need collaboration. Let's get everyone together in the room, whether it's nowadays via Zoom or in person, but let's get all the advisors in the room and really talk to the owner first about what their goals are, what they like and dislike, come up with a plan, like a series of plans, and then move forward. But again, I just think it's important that we hash out what they've talked about in the past, what they liked and disliked, because then we kind of know where to go from there.
Yeah. Having that roadmap is, vitally important. And again, I know that you coordinate this kind of stuff, so we'll be asking about contact info in just a moment. But before then, we're on number 10.
Yeah, number 10. So I do ask, I ask clients to think about this, and I ask them to think about it, which is, as a bottom line, what's your greatest challenge when you think about planning for the future, when you think about planning for your exit? And I will say that most of the time, the majority of the time, let's say, the owner's pretty straightforward in just saying, my procrastination, my not inability, but my hesitation to really bring up the hard topics, the hard conversation, especially with family businesses, because you're having holidays and these are your kids and your parents and your cousins, and you all hang around and you're all related and you've got a lot of connections other than business. So it's really the psychology of it is more important. And I think the point is, if I bring that out and we all acknowledge that procrastination is one of the reasons, it's digging in deep to the bottom of that iceberg, that at the very least they're aware of it, and maybe we can at least prod them forward to try and overcome that. But that would be my last question that I ask them is, Tell me what you think of as the greatest challenge, and let's hammer at that one first.
Yeah. And I think that hesitation or procrastination is a lot of it's rooted in fear, wouldn't you think?
It is. It very much is, especially when there's kids or the future generation taking over the business's family. Because as you know, Eric, I mean, each of your children are very different skill sets, different fears, goals, etc.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, families just don't want to bring all that stuff up.
Yep, absolutely. Well, any closing thoughts for today? I mean, this was a great list, and I appreciate the time. Besides the contact information, what do you got for closing thoughts?
Yeah, so my biggest takeaway is, building a business is very rewarding. I've built a business. I love it. I love my team. I love my clients. I really look back with the success. I'm aware of all the highs and lows. It's an amazing process. It's an amazing thing. But when you're looking to exit, or I should say, and when you're looking to exit, there's really critical things you need to really focus on, or you're not going to successfully exit. The business won't survive. So I just wanted to point out these, what I call 10 questions that everyone should think about, a business owner should think about, because I think my goal is to get people ready to exit and kind of take the first step towards the best part of their life.
Perfect. Tim, thank you so much for your time today. Again, now the big question, somebody going through this list going, okay, there's 3 of these that I really need to focus on, 3 of these questions I really need to, have a hard ask for myself, and they want to go through that with you. How do they get a hold of you?
They can always call me at 219-531-4941 or send me an email at tscannell@hightoweradvisors.com.
Fantastic. Again, Tim, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Eric.
You bet. And our last thank you always goes to you, the listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the WealthStream Podcast with Tim Scannell. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Tim comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it really easy to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at Hightower Great Lakes, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the WealthStream Podcast. We hope you gained some valuable insight that you can apply to your life and share with others. Please don't forget to subscribe below to be notified when new episodes become available. And don't forget to live greater. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Hightower Great Lakes. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Hightower Great Lakes is a group of investment professionals registered with Hightower Securities LLC, member FINRA and SIPC, and with Hightower Advisors LLC, a registered investment advisor with the SEC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities LLC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors LLC.